The prison guards had one rule they never broke. Never enter cell 47. Not during the day. Not during the night. Not even if someone inside was screaming for help. On a cold October night, every alarm in Blackstone Prison suddenly began to ring. Red lights flashed across the dark hallways. Metal doors slammed shut. Guards rushed through the prison corridors. Then they stopped, because the alarms were coming from cell 47. The prison cell nobody was allowed to enter. Warden James Carter stood at the end of the hallway, staring at the thick steel door. His hands shook. For 20 years he had worked in prisons. He had seen riots. He had seen escapes. He had seen dangerous criminals. But he had never seen this. The small window on cell 47's door was covered from the inside. Something had blocked it. Nobody could see inside. A strange scratching sound came from behind the door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Every guard stepped backward. Nobody wanted to be near it. Then the scratching stopped. The hallway became silent. So silent that everyone could hear their own breathing. And then a voice spoke from inside the cell. A voice that should have been impossible. A voice belonging to an inmate who had disappeared from that very cell 10 years earlier. The voice said only 4 words. "I found the truth." Warden Carter's face turned pale. The guards looked at one another. Because the man who spoke those words was supposed to be dead. And when the steel door slowly began to unlock itself, everyone realized something terrible was waiting on the other side. But nobody knew what it was. To understand how cell 47 became the most feared place in Blackstone Prison, we have to go back 6 months earlier. Blackstone Prison stood far from any city. Tall fences surrounded it. Watchtowers looked down from every corner. The prison was old. Very old. Many parts of it had been built over 70 years ago. Most inmates avoided the East Wing. That was where cell 47 was located. Even the toughest prisoners stayed away from it. Nobody talked much about the cell. When new inmates asked questions, older inmates would simply say one thing: "Forget it exists." One afternoon, a young prison officer named Ethan Brooks started his first day at Blackstone. Ethan was 28 years old. He believed rules existed for a reason. He also believed every mystery had an answer. The other guards liked him immediately. He worked hard. He treated people fairly. And he wasn't afraid of difficult assignments. That afternoon, Sergeant Mike Turner gave Ethan a tour of the prison. Everything seemed normal until they reached the East Wing. The hallway suddenly became quieter. The inmates spoke less. Some even looked nervous. Ethan noticed a steel door at the far end. Unlike the other cells, this one had 2 locks. A security camera pointed directly at it. Another camera watched the hallway. And a third camera watched the first 2 cameras. Ethan frowned. "Why so much security?" he asked. Mike stopped walking. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "That's cell 47. Ethan waited. Mike looked around to make sure nobody was listening. Then he lowered his voice. "No inmate has lived there in 10 years. Then why keep it locked?" Mike's face became serious. Because every inmate who stayed in that cell discovered something. "What kind of something?" Mike shook his head. "No one knows." Ethan laughed. "That's impossible. I wish it was." The conversation ended there. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, he noticed strange things. Guards avoided talking about cell 47. Prison records about the cell were missing. Old reports had vanished. Even the prison librarian refused to discuss it. The more Ethan searched, the more secrets he found. Then one rainy evening, while checking an unused storage room, he discovered something hidden behind a cabinet. A dusty cardboard box. Inside were old prison files. Files that someone had tried very hard to hide. At the top of the stack was a photograph. The picture showed cell 47. But that wasn't what made Ethan freeze. Written across the back of the photograph were 5 words. "Do not let them know." Beneath the message was a signature. The signature belonged to a former warden who had disappeared without explanation 15 years earlier. As Ethan stared at the photograph, He heard footsteps behind him. Slow, heavy, getting closer. Then a voice spoke from the darkness. "You weren't supposed to find that." Ethan turned around and saw a shadow standing in the doorway, holding a key marked Cell 47. Ethan's heart began to pound. The storage room was small and dark. Rain tapped against the prison windows outside. The shadow stood perfectly still in the doorway. In one hand was an old brass key. Attached to it was a faded tag. Cell 47. For a moment, neither person spoke. Then the shadow stepped forward. Ethan recognized the man immediately. It was Robert Hayes, one of the oldest maintenance workers in Blackstone Prison. Robert had worked there for more than 30 years. Most people barely noticed him. He fixed broken pipes. He repaired doors. He spent most of his time alone. But right now, he looked terrified. "You weren't supposed to find those files," Robert said quietly. Ethan held up the photograph. "What is this?" Robert glanced at the picture and sighed. "The reason people stay away from Cell 47. Ethan took a step closer. "Then tell me." Robert looked toward the hallway. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Not here." The old man quickly shut the storage room door. Then he sat on an empty crate. For several seconds, he simply stared at the floor. Finally, he spoke. 15 years ago, Warden Daniel Mercer disappeared. Ethan nodded. He had heard that name before. Mercer was the former warden whose signature appeared on the photograph. "No one ever found him," Robert continued. "The official report said he resigned and left." "You don't believe that?" Robert shook his head. "Because I saw what happened the night he vanished." Ethan felt a chill run through him. Robert leaned closer. The last place anyone saw Mercer was Cell 47. The room became silent. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Ethan opened one of the old files. Most of the pages were damaged. Some had entire sections missing. But one sentence remained clear. "Inmate claims to have found a hidden room." Ethan looked up. "What hidden room?" Robert's eyes widened. "You see why those files were hidden? Tell me." The old maintenance worker hesitated. Then he slowly nodded. "Years ago, prisoners began reporting strange sounds inside Cell 47. "What kind of sounds?" "Knocking." Ethan frowned. "From inside the walls." A cold feeling settled in his stomach. Robert continued. "At first, nobody believed them. But then more inmates reported the same thing. Knock, knock, knock. Always coming from behind the back wall. Always late at night." Ethan stared at the file. "And they investigated?" Robert laughed nervously. "Eventually." According to the reports, workers examined the wall. They discovered something unusual. Part of the concrete was newer than the rest, as if someone had covered something up many years earlier. A small team was ordered to inspect it. But before they could begin, every record about the investigation disappeared. Just gone. The project was cancelled. The wall remained untouched. And Cell 47 was locked. Forever. Ethan's curiosity grew stronger. If there's a hidden room, why not open the wall? Robert stood up quickly. Because everyone who got close to the truth either disappeared, quit, or stopped asking questions. The old man looked genuinely frightened. For the first time, Ethan wondered if this mystery was bigger than he imagined. Robert handed him the brass key. Ethan looked surprised. "What are you doing?" "I'm retiring next week." "The key belongs to you now." Ethan stared at it. The metal felt cold in his hand. "Why me?" Robert looked exhausted. "Because somebody needs to know the truth." Before Ethan could ask another question, a loud voice echoed through the hallway outside. "Security inspection." Robert's face immediately changed. Panic flashed across his eyes. He grabbed Ethan's arm. "Hide those files." "What? Now?" Ethan quickly shoved the documents back into the box. Moments later, 2 prison officials entered the room. One of them was Deputy Warden Frank Doyle. Nobody liked Doyle. He was strict, secretive, and always seemed to know things he shouldn't know. His eyes immediately landed on Ethan. "What are you doing here?" "Checking inventory," Ethan replied. Doyle stared at him for several seconds. Then his gaze shifted to Robert. Neither man spoke, but Ethan noticed something strange. Robert looked terrified, and Doyle looked angry. The deputy warden finally smiled. A cold smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Good," Doyle said. "Then get back to work." The officials left. When their footsteps disappeared, Ethan turned toward Robert. But Robert was already heading for the door. "Wait," Ethan said. "You still haven't told me everything." Robert stopped. Without turning around, he spoke. "The hidden room isn't the dangerous part." Ethan froze. "Then what is?" Robert looked back over his shoulder. His face had gone completely pale. "The dangerous part is what they found inside." Before Ethan could ask another question, Robert hurried away. For the next several days, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about those words. What had been hidden inside the wall? Why were prison records missing? And why did Deputy Warden Doyle seem so nervous whenever Cell 47 was mentioned? The answers felt close. Closer than ever. 3 nights later, Ethan finally made a decision. After his shift ended, he quietly returned to the East Wing. The prison was almost silent. Most inmates were asleep. The hallway lights flickered overhead. Slowly, he approached Cell 47. The brass key felt heavy in his pocket. His hands trembled as he inserted it into the lock. For years, nobody had opened this door. The key turned. Click. The first lock opened. Then the second. A deep metallic sound echoed through the corridor. Ethan took a deep breath. Slowly, he pulled the door open. The dark cell stood empty. Dust covered the floor. The bed frame sat untouched. Everything looked normal. At first. Then Ethan noticed something scratched into the back wall. Fresh scratches. Not old ones. Fresh ones. As if someone had written them only hours earlier. He stepped closer. And when he read the message, every hair on his arms stood up. Because the words carved into the concrete said, "He knows you opened the door." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the words scratched into the concrete wall. "He knows you opened the door." The message looked fresh. Very fresh. Tiny pieces of concrete still rested on the floor beneath it. As if someone had carved the words only minutes ago. But that was impossible. The cell had been empty for years. At least, that was what everyone claimed. Ethan slowly turned around. The hallway outside was silent. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. Yet he suddenly felt like someone was watching him. He stepped back toward the door. Then he heard it. Knock. 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 The sound came from behind the wall. Ethan froze. The knocking stopped. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then it came again. Knock. 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 3 slow knocks. Exactly as Robert Hayes had described. The sound wasn't coming from another cell. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside the wall itself. Ethan's heart raced. He moved closer and pressed his ear against the concrete. The wall felt colder than the rest of the room. Much colder. Then he heard something else. A faint sound. Almost like a whisper. He couldn't make out the words. But someone, or something, seemed to be speaking on the other side. Suddenly, a loud buzz echoed through the prison. The hallway lights flickered. Ethan jumped away from the wall. The whisper vanished instantly. A few seconds later, the lights stabilized. The cell became quiet again. Ethan knew he couldn't stay much longer. If another guard caught him inside Cell 47, he would have a lot of questions to answer. Before leaving, he examined the back wall carefully. Most of it looked normal, except for one section near the floor. The concrete there was cracked. Only slightly, but enough to notice. Ethan knelt down. He brushed away years of dust. Something metallic appeared beneath the dirt. A small piece of rusted steel, like part of an old hidden door. His pulse quickened. Robert had been telling the truth. There really was something behind the wall. The next morning, Ethan arrived at work exhausted. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the message on the wall. "He knows you opened the door." Who was he? And how could anyone know what Ethan had done? Throughout the day, he watched the prison carefully. Nothing seemed unusual. Inmates followed their routines. Guards worked their shifts. Everything looked normal. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. That afternoon, he went searching for Robert Hayes. But nobody had seen him. His workshop was empty. His tools were gone. Even his locker had been cleaned out. It was as if he had vanished overnight. Ethan immediately felt uneasy. Robert had planned to retire next week. Not yesterday. Something wasn't right. Later that evening, Ethan checked the staff records. According to the computer system, Robert Hayes had officially retired that morning. No goodbye. No notice. No explanation. Just gone. The timing felt too convenient. As Ethan stared at the screen, another name caught his attention. Daniel Mercer, the former warden. His personnel file had suddenly been accessed the previous night. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the same time Ethan had entered cell 47. A chill ran down his spine. Who had opened the file? The system listed no name. Only one word. Authorized. Ethan printed the record, then quickly slipped it into his pocket. He didn't trust the prison computers anymore. That night, a heavy storm rolled across Blackstone Prison. Rain pounded against the buildings. Thunder shook the windows. Most staff stayed inside. Around midnight, Ethan sat alone in the security office. Rows of camera screens covered the walls. Normally, watching them was boring. But tonight something caught his attention. Camera E-17. The East Wing. Cell 47. Ethan leaned closer. The hallway was empty, but the cell door appeared slightly open. His stomach dropped. He knew he had locked it. Twice. He was certain. Yet now it stood open by several inches. The camera image suddenly flickered. For a brief second, static filled the screen. Then the image returned. Ethan's blood ran cold. A figure now stood in front of cell 47. A person. Tall. Motionless. Facing the camera. The image quality was poor. Too poor to identify who it was. Ethan grabbed his radio. "Control, do you see East Wing camera E-17? No response. Only static. He tried again. Still nothing. The prison radio system had gone dead. A loud crack of thunder shook the building. The lights dimmed. Then came back. The figure remained on the screen. Not moving. Not blinking. Just standing there. Watching. Ethan made a decision. He rushed out of the security office and headed toward the East Wing. The hallways felt different tonight. Darker. Quieter. The storm outside seemed to swallow every sound. After several minutes, he reached the East Wing. The corridor was empty. No figure. No open cell door. Nothing. Everything looked normal. For a moment, Ethan wondered if the camera had malfunctioned. Then he noticed something lying on the floor. A folded piece of paper. Right outside cell 47. Slowly, he picked it up. The paper was old and yellowed. Its edges were torn. It looked like it had been hidden for years. Ethan unfolded it. His eyes widened. It was a map. A hand-drawn map of Blackstone Prison. Most of the prison appeared normal. But beneath the building, someone had drawn a network of hidden tunnels. Secret passages. Hidden rooms. Areas that did not exist on any official blueprint. At the center of the map was a large red circle. And inside that circle were two words. The Chamber. Before Ethan could study it further, a loud crash echoed from inside cell 47. He spun around. The cell door, which had been closed seconds earlier, slowly creaked open. Darkness filled the room beyond. Then a flashlight beam suddenly appeared inside the cell. Someone was down there. Not in the cell. Beyond the wall. deep inside whatever had been hidden for all these years. And then a frightened voice echoed from the darkness. A voice Ethan recognized immediately. It belonged to Robert Hayes. And the words he shouted made Ethan's heart stop. "Run, Ethan! They're coming! Run, Ethan! They're coming!" Robert Hayes's voice echoed from somewhere beyond the wall. Ethan stood frozen. For a moment, he couldn't believe what he had heard. Robert was supposed to be gone. Retired. Maybe even missing. Yet his voice had come from inside the secret area behind cell 47. Then another sound followed. Footsteps. Fast footsteps. Not one person. Several. Coming from deep inside the darkness beyond the wall. Ethan's survival instincts finally kicked in. He backed away from the opening. His heart hammered in his chest. The storm outside shook the prison windows. Thunder crashed overhead. For a second, the lights flickered. Then everything went dark. The entire east wing lost power. Ethan could barely see his own hands. Only the flashlight beam deep inside the hidden passage remained visible. Then even that disappeared. The darkness became complete. A cold feeling spread through the hallway. Ethan reached for his own flashlight. His shaking hands finally found it. He switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness. The cell looked empty again. Too empty. As if nobody had ever been there. Yet he knew what he had heard. Robert was alive. And he was somewhere beneath the prison. Suddenly, the emergency generators activated. The lights returned. The hallway brightened. The storm continued outside. Ethan quickly stepped into cell 47. He knelt beside the cracked section of wall. Now that he looked closely, he saw something he had missed before. The hidden opening wasn't actually part of the wall. It was part of the floor. A narrow steel hatch had been disguised beneath old concrete. Years of dust had hidden it. Someone had carefully covered it long ago. Ethan used all his strength to pull. The hatch groaned loudly. Finally it opened. A set of metal stairs descended into darkness. Cold air rushed upward. Air that smelled old. Very old. Like a place nobody had entered in years. At the bottom of the stairs stretched a narrow tunnel. Ethan pointed his flashlight downward. The tunnel continued farther than he expected. The walls were lined with aging bricks. Water dripped from the ceiling. The hidden map suddenly made sense. The tunnels were real. Every one of them. After taking a deep breath, Ethan started down the stairs. Each step echoed through the darkness. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. Halfway down, he noticed something scratched into the brick wall. Names. Dozens of names. Some were prison staff. Others were inmates. Many of them matched names from the missing records. People connected to cell 47. People who had disappeared. A chill crawled up Ethan's spine. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel split into two directions. One path led left. The other right. On the wall someone had drawn a small arrow. The faded writing beneath it read, "The truth this way." Ethan followed the arrow. The tunnel twisted beneath the prison like a maze. Minutes passed. Then more. Eventually he reached a large steel door. Unlike the prison doors upstairs, this one looked much older. Rust covered its surface. A heavy chain hung from one side. But the chain had been cut recently. Someone had entered. Slowly, Ethan pushed the door open. The room beyond was enormous. Far larger than any space shown on the prison blueprints. Rows of filing cabinets filled the chamber. Hundreds of them. Dust covered everything. Old desks stood abandoned. Stacks of documents sat untouched. It looked like a secret archive hidden beneath Blackstone Prison. Ethan walked deeper into the room. The files stretched as far as his flashlight could reach. Many contained photographs, investigation reports, old prison records, records that should have existed upstairs, records someone had deliberately hidden. Then Ethan discovered something shocking. One entire cabinet was labeled, Cell 47. His hands trembled as he opened the drawer. Inside were dozens of files. Every inmate who had ever occupied the cell. Every investigation. Every incident. Everything the prison had tried to erase. Ethan pulled out the oldest file. The date made his eyes widen. The file described construction work beneath the prison. Workers had accidentally discovered an older structure buried underground. A hidden facility that existed before Blackstone Prison had even been built. According to the report, strange documents had been found there. Documents connected to organized crime groups operating decades earlier. The hidden chamber had once been used to store evidence. Evidence powerful people wanted to keep secret. The report ended abruptly. Several pages were missing. As Ethan reached for another file, a voice suddenly spoke behind him. "You're finally seeing it." Ethan spun around. Standing at the far side of the room was Robert Hayes. He looked tired. Older than before. But alive. "Robert." The old man nodded. "You shouldn't have come. What's happening here?" Robert sighed heavily. For years, people protected this place. Protected what? The truth. Ethan held up the file. "About the crimes." Robert nodded. "Some very powerful people were involved decades ago." "Then why hide everything?" Robert's expression darkened. "Because the evidence never disappeared." Ethan looked around the chamber. Thousands of files surrounded them. Then realization hit him. All the missing records. All the vanished reports. Everything had been hidden down here. Not destroyed. Hidden. Suddenly a loud metallic bang echoed through the tunnel. Both men froze. Another bang followed. Closer this time. Someone was entering the underground chamber. And they weren't alone. Several flashlights appeared in the tunnel entrance. Moving toward them. Fast. Robert's face turned pale. "They found you." "Who?" Before Robert could answer, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. A cold voice. A voice Ethan recognized instantly. Deputy Warden Frank Doyle stepped into the room. 3 armed security officers stood behind him. Doyle slowly smiled. The same smile Ethan had seen before. The smile that never reached his eyes. "You were supposed to stop asking questions, Officer Brooks." Ethan's stomach dropped. Doyle glanced around the chamber. Then his eyes settled on the Cell 47 file in Ethan's hands. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Doyle said something that changed everything. "You're looking in the wrong place." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Doyle pointed toward a massive steel vault door hidden at the far end of the chamber. A door Ethan had not even noticed. Its surface was covered with warning signs. Heavy locks sealed it shut. Doyle's smile slowly disappeared. "The real secret isn't in these files." A deep metallic sound suddenly echoed through the underground room. Clang. Everyone turned toward the vault. Another sound followed. Clang. The massive vault door was moving. Opening from the inside. And whatever was behind it had just unlocked the first lock. Clang. The sound echoed through the underground chamber. Everyone stared at the massive vault door. Another lock clicked open. Then another. The heavy steel door slowly began to move. Ethan's heart pounded. Robert Hayes took a nervous step backward. Even Deputy Warden Doyle looked uneasy. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The ancient door opened just enough to reveal darkness beyond it. A cold draft rushed into the chamber. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped out. Ethan tightened his grip on the file. The person looked old. Very old. Gray hair. Thin face. Tired eyes. Yet the moment Ethan saw him, he recognized the photograph from the hidden records. The man standing in the doorway was Daniel Mercer, the former warden who had supposedly disappeared 15 years earlier. The room fell silent. Ethan could hardly believe it. "You're alive," he whispered. Mercer nodded slowly. "Yes." Deputy Warden Doyle lowered his head. It was clear he already knew. Ethan looked from Mercer to Doyle. "What's going on?" Mercer stepped fully into the chamber. "The truth." For years, everyone had believed Mercer vanished. But that wasn't what happened. 15 years earlier, Mercer discovered the hidden archive beneath Blackstone Prison. Inside were records connected to major criminal investigations from decades before. The documents exposed corrupt officials, organized crime networks, and people who had used their power to hide evidence. Mercer realized that if the records disappeared, important truths would be lost forever. So he made a choice. Instead of destroying the evidence, he secretly protected it. Only a few trusted people knew the archive existed. Robert Hayes was one of them. Frank Doyle was another. Together, they created the story that Mercer had disappeared. In reality, he remained hidden while preserving the records. The prison above continued operating normally. Meanwhile, the archive remained untouched. Ethan listened carefully. Everything finally began to make sense. The missing files, the hidden tunnels, the strange warnings, the locked cell. Cell 47 had become the doorway protecting the archive. Over time, rumors spread. Stories became legends. Each generation added new details. Eventually, people became afraid of the cell itself. Fear helped keep curious people away. Robert sighed. The mystery became larger than the truth. Ethan looked at the old maintenance worker. Then what about the messages? Robert smiled slightly. Some were warnings left by the people protecting this place. And the knocking? Mercer pointed upward. Old water pipes hidden inside the walls. At night they expanded and contracted. The sound echoed through the cell. Ethan felt almost embarrassed. The mystery that had terrified so many people had ordinary explanations. Yet one question remained. The inmate voice from 10 years ago? Mercer's expression grew serious. That part wasn't a ghost story either. Years earlier, an inmate had discovered clues about the hidden chamber. Before he could learn too much, prison officials transferred him to another facility. But rumors spread among the inmates. Each retelling changed the story. Soon people believed he had disappeared. Then they believed he had died. Then they believed his voice still haunted Cell 47. A simple rumor had become prison legend. Ethan finally understood. The prison had never been hiding monsters. It had been hiding secrets. Real secrets. Historical records. Evidence. Truth. Nothing supernatural at all. Suddenly Mercer handed Ethan a thick folder. Inside were documents authorizing the archive to be transferred to state investigators. "Why now?" Ethan asked. Mercer smiled. "Because the people connected to those old crimes are gone. The records could finally be released. The truth no longer needed to stay hidden." Months later, investigators carefully reviewed the files. The archive helped solve several decades-old cases. Families finally received answers they had waited years to hear. Historical records were preserved. Lost evidence was catalogued properly. And Blackstone Prison entered the news for an entirely different reason. Not because of ghosts. Not because of curses. But because hidden records had finally come to light. Cell 47 was eventually opened permanently. Workers removed the false walls. The hidden tunnel entrance was documented. The prison even created a small historical exhibit explaining what had happened. For the first time in decades, people could enter the cell freely. The place that had once inspired fear became a symbol of something else. The importance of protecting the truth. One afternoon, nearly a year later, Ethan stood inside Cell 47. Sunlight streamed through the small window. The room felt different now. Peaceful. Ordinary. The mystery was finally over. Or so he thought. As he prepared to leave, he noticed something carved into the wall near the floor. A message hidden beneath layers of old paint. Words nobody had seen before. Ethan knelt down and brushed away the dust. Then he smiled. The carving was old. Very old. Likely written by one of the workers who first discovered the underground archive decades earlier. It read, "The truth always finds a way out." Ethan stood quietly for a moment. Then he locked the empty cell behind him and walked away. For years, people had feared the prison cell nobody was allowed to enter. In the end, there had never been anything supernatural hiding there. Only a secret. A secret protected by ordinary people who believed that someday the truth mattered more than fear. And eventually they were right. The mystery of Cell 47 was finally solved.